As you can tell, I am embarrassingly late with this video, mostly because the month of October was terrible when it comes to reading, or so I thought, until I really looked back into it. The month of October was insanely hectic for me, with people, work, cats, and family battling each other for my attention and leaving me completely exhausted to the point of losing all inspiration. And on top of that, I went through a bit of a reading slump, which I assume is caused by the lack of inspiration. So I was kind of dreading filming this, as though anyone would be offended by my failure to keep up with some unexisting standard. Not to mention, I was visiting my family for 2 weeks, and filming there was rather difficult with people barging into rooms unannounced at all times of day and not having my books around. But I am now back at my place, and being a grown-up, I decided to bite the bullet and get it over with. And in the process of preparing for this video, I realized I didn't do bad at all. Looking into my reading stats for October, I could see that I finished 8 books. 5 fantasies, 1 classic, 1 thriller, and 1 manga. Now, 8 books is by no means anything to scoff at, especially when you compare it to the first few months of the year and to October of last year. And when I took a look at the pages read, I realized that I had read more pages than I did in September. So why did I think I did terribly? We'll talk more about this later. But I like numbers and stats, and this is the story they told today. Now let's look into the books. I started the month by finishing The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. It's included in my September wrap-up, but it being such a great book, it left me with a bit of a hangover, and I tried battling that by picking up Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. This is an adult paranormal fantasy and the first book in the Alex Stern series. It follows 20-year-old Galaxy Stern, who has had very difficult childhood and adolescence, and against all odds attends Yale University. She is tasked by her benefactors to monitor the activities of Yale's secret societies, which dabble in all kinds of magic, and she discovers that those could be quite dangerous. I had quite low expectations of this book, but I was pleasantly surprised by it. First, the writing style of Leigh Bardugo is so easy to read. It doesn't have any overcomplicated phrases or metaphors, but it's by no means bland or generic. And then we have what is proving to be one of my favorite methods of storytelling, and that is multiple timelines. The story is told from 2 points of view and 3 different times of the year: the fall, the winter, and the spring, which is the present time. I like how the combination of those brought an extra level of intrigue to the story without introducing any confusion. The characters were quite interesting, though somewhat on the younger side, and the book constantly sits on this edge of becoming a little bit too edgy and cringy, but never crosses over, which speaks of the talent of the author to walk a tightrope, so to speak. But I think what surprised me the most was the brutality of this book, and I advise you to double check the contents of it before going into it if you have any sensitivities. I quite enjoyed it and gave it 4 stars. It was still the beginning of the month, and I was still fresh from finishing The Way of Kings, and I was looking to replicate the feelings of following an epic fantasy with a big cast of characters. So I decided to pick up Rise of Empire by Michael J. Sullivan. This is an adult epic fantasy and the second book in the Rhaeria Revelations series. I read book 1 in September. Now, this book took me absolutely forever to finish, and I believe this is when the slump initially showed its less than pleasant face. This is the moment where my work had entered a very busy phase, and the nature of it is such that it requires a lot of decision making on multiple very different subjects, which would leave me very exhausted at the end of the day. And around that time I had neutered my cats, which didn't go without complications. They are fine now, but there were a few days back at that moment where I was really worried. And there were days where I would read just a page and days where I would read nothing, and at the time I hadn't realized that I was in a slump, so I tried battling it by picking a few other books, which we'll talk about later. And despite all of that, I can honestly say that this is a very good book. I liked how much deeper the story got and how the author managed to pull some quite obscure characters into the main action and make them stand out. It's truly a skill to navigate such a huge cast of characters. There were a few things I didn't particularly approve of, like Royce and Hadrian using their real names in a situation where if they were discovered, they would have been in a huge trouble. And then there was the lightning speed of some rather important events. The main battle of the first part of the book took all of 2 pages, and the final battle of part 2 happened off-page. And then there was the enormous amount of naval slang in the second part of the book, which made it near impossible for me to understand the narrative, and I had to stop every 2 words and Google what they mean. Other than that, there were some good plot twists and fun plot in general, as well as some very good character work. I gave it 4 stars. I had already unknowingly entered my reading slump, and I was looking for something nostalgic to light up the spark of reading again, and I picked up Peter Pan as an audiobook. This is a classic middle grade / young adult fantasy story, and everyone knows what it's about, so I will skip the summary. This was a great success, and I completed the book within a day, and just like I did when I was a kid, I absolutely loved it. Though, being a grown-up, the magic seems to have faded just a tiny bit, so I gave it 4 stars. Then, following up on my nostalgia kick, I decided to pick up Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets by J.K. Rowling. This is a young adult fantasy novel and the second book in the Harry Potter series. I will again skip the synopsis because everybody is familiar with this series. I loved this one, despite the fact that it took me 2 weeks to finish it. These books are immortal to me. I can and do always come back to them, and reading them always feels like coming home. I remember this book being my least favorite in the series, but that means nothing because it still got 5 stars. And then, suspecting already and trying to battle this reading slump, I decided to switch genre and picked up The It Girl by Ruth Ware. This is an adult standalone thriller. It follows Hannah, who back in the day suffered a traumatic experience when she found her college roommate murdered. In the present day, 10 years later, Hannah is married to her dead roommate's ex-boyfriend, and the convicted murderer has just died. But a reporter shows up claiming that the murderer might have been wrongly convicted, which flips Hannah's quiet life upside down. I have a full review of this book, which you can watch over here, so all I'm gonna say is that I didn't like it, and this is gonna be the last book by Ruth Ware that I'm gonna read. I gave it 2 stars. It was close to the end of the month, and I had just arrived at my parents' house, and being that I could only pack a limited amount of books with me, I opted to take Fullmetal Alchemist Volume 4. This is the 4th installment of a young adult manga series about 2 brothers who tried to resurrect their mother using alchemy, and as a result, one of them lost a leg and an arm, while the other his entire body, and now they're going around trying to find a way to restore their bodies. This series is an absolute marvel. I have not a one bad thing to say about it, and if you haven't read it, or if you're looking to get into reading manga, I highly recommend it. I myself am new to the genre, and I'm having the best time with it. I gave it 5 stars. As you can tell, around that time I had started coming out of my reading slump, and being that I read the second part of Rise of Empire within 2 days, I decided to pick up the third and last book in this series, Heir of Novron. This book is over 900 pages long, and I read it within 2 days. I just couldn't stop reading. I think one of the best things about this series, which I already mentioned earlier, is that the author isn't afraid to bring characters from previous books out of obscurity and give them a main role in the narrative. This attention to the unimportant people lends an endearing and surprisingly realistic aspect to the story. Another thing that I need to give praise for are the well-plotted and laid out twists. Some I managed to guess, including the very last scene in this book, which I loved, and some surprised me nicely. I think it was a great ending to the series. I gave it 5 stars, and I'm looking forward to reading more from Michael J. Sullivan. Which leads me to the last book for October, and that is Empire of the Vampire by J. Kristoff. This is an adult paranormal dark fantasy, and the first book in the series that has the same name. I picked this one up after a discussion with an Instagram follower, and because 'twas the season for such books, and I'm only slightly conflicted on it. I like the book well enough. I think it's the best vampire book I've read so far, though I haven't read many of those, so it had a great atmosphere, which was gloomy and depressing, and some nice plot twists and very interesting characters. And it didn't get 5 stars because it was so damn long for no damn reason. This was over 700 pages to tell 3/4 of an eighth of a story. The author kept on throwing hints and mentions about things that supposedly happened, but barely showed any of them. The story he told could have rested comfortably within 500 pages, if that. There was so much repeating of scenes, of feels, of descriptions, of metaphors, like a dear friend who came to visit and overstayed his welcome. By the time I reached 80%, I was tired of descriptions and of reading about the taste of blood in my mouth, that I just wanted it all to end. And that kind of ruined the moment of the big reveal, which at that point I had guessed 200 pages ago. Regardless, I am invested to an extent and would like to know how the story goes. I gave it 4 stars. So, what did this last month teach me? Well, reading is a hobby, and whether I read 2 books or 20 books, if I enjoyed them, it is enough. And if you'd like to see the summary of my best reading month of this year, check out this video. Bye!